Let's start at the top, shall we? Professor X. Professor X is getting nerfed. He's got a lot going on in text. They really have a long-winded explanation. He is getting changed to 5-1. So how significant is this? I think it's a pretty big deal. I mean, before he was just a 5-3. He could carry a little bit of weight. His 3 was measurable. I mean, it made a difference. 5-1 makes him pretty much, he relies on everything else that's already there to be locked, to be useful. So he can still jump in on an empty spot and, of course, lock it down, but it takes very little effort to steal Professor X's place. Jeff is a staple for a lot of Professor X. It's a way to add 3 at a later time if you need it. He's cheap to get in play. He can jump through any spot. There's no restrictions on him. So he's a staple. But now you've only got 4 on Professor X's spot. Now you really need those bumps that come along with things like Miss Marvel. Now apparently there's a card down the road that's a weaker version of Miss Marvel. People are complaining about how strong Professor X was. He's annoying. I don't play Professor X decks very often. I don't even know if I have Professor X in any of my decks. I like the premise. I like to build decks that I feel, although they're still strategically similar to some other decks, I feel are a little bit different. So it's not really, it'll affect me more in what I see in the world. So the next one is another new card, actually. Werewolf by Night's only been around for a month. But his big change, they just made him more expensive. And I believe they even gave him a bump in power. Yeah, he was a 3-3. Now he's a 4-4. So what does this mean? You're not going to see him in Silver Surfer decks anymore. He has no play there. So there were Surfer decks that I saw him come up with. He's an extra bump, of power. But now he's moved on to the 4-4 realm. I think he's going to be a lot less common at 4-4. You've got to reduce his cost. You got to come up with ways to get him in early if you want to move him around a lot. He's a little bit more work. He'll probably show up less. I have a feeling we're going to see less of Werewolf by Night coming metas. But for now, we'll see. This is kind of a wait and see. I don't know. I don't own Werewolf, as you can see, my black and white image. Sometimes making things cheaper is a nerf, even though they call it a buff. Sometimes usually making them more expensive is a nerf. That's almost always the case. Unless you're moving to a 3. Because again, there's a lot of decks that rely on the cost of 3. Because Surfer. So you're giving options to Surfers by giving things to 3. There's not a lot of things that rely on cost other than Surfer decks, right? I mean, here 1-cost cards maybe. There's 1-cost card boosts and there's 3-cost card boosts. There aren't any 2-cost card or 4-cost card boosts. So there's very few decks that are built around those. There are highest power, and then you have to fiddle with things like Cerebro and stuff like that to try to get those to work. Black Widow. Okay, so Black Widow, I don't know if this is a nerf or a buff. Okay, so this one is it makes her into 3-3, right? So now she's more expensive and she's stronger. But she's a 3 now. So she's a decent strength. 3-3 is not terrible for a card that can literally give your opponent a -1 and stop them. You basically take away one of the cards they get a draw. So yes, less playable in the fact that you can't just keep playing it on people, right? I mean, it's harder to get a 3-cost card down multiple times. I mean, you might get it down twice, but it's going to take more to do it, right? So if you play it with Beast and you pick her up, put her down, she's cheaper, but she's still a 2. So a 1 is easy. You just throw them down and keep messing with people because it's just an extra card, especially if you're playing cheap deck. But as a 3, 2s become a little bit more harder to get, and she's still a 3, so you have to play her on turn 3. Beast on turn 4. You might get her down on turn 5. Putting her on 6 doesn't matter. So unless you can figure out a way to get her down on turn 2, which is near impossible. There's not a lot of things that are going to get a 3 down in turn 2. There's territories that can do it, but you can't plan on those. So ultimately, Black Widow might see some play though in 3-cost decks. Again, Surfer. I mean, you get a kind of strangle your opponent a little bit, potentially giving them an extra -1 into play. So if they have to, if you play her on turn 3, your opponent effectively turns her into a 3/4. A 3/4 is pretty good because they have to put that -1 down unless they don't care, unless they already have the perfect hand and they're just going to hold it. I've done that, but it's not always the case, and it's usually you have to dump Black Widow. Sometimes Black Widow, I have noticed that this is a whole nother thing about Black Widow, is her Widow's Bite can work against her if she's got the wrong deck going. It's like, discard this card to get +2 energy. Well, shoot, +2 energy for free. Thank you, Black Widow. So you blocked my card, but now I can play a bigger card that I wouldn't have played before, and I'll just draw on the next turn. But anyway, it's not bad. Darkhawk is going to take advantage of Black Widow. Black Widow played with to a card I keep wanting to bring up, but I can't because it's down the list. We'll get there. Martyr. I don't own Martyr. Right now, Martyr's not in the conversation. She's a 1/5 now, though. And this will probably put her in the conversation. Because I think now Martyr will displace Titania. Because she takes away the risk of losing her. Right? I mean, Titania could end up helping your opponent. There's all this gambling. Should I put a card down? Should I not put a card down? You're strategizing. You really ought to overthink just keeping Titania on your side of the board. Okay, so Martyr's going to try to lose you the game, but she's a 1/5. She's going to have a hard time losing you the game. A 1/5 is a very good, powerful card. If your opponent plays like a blob in an area and just blows away one of your territories, I mean, you just can't win that territory and you want to win one of the other two, Martyr's not going to be your friend. Martyr's going to go over there and basically nullify her power because she's going to be sitting there. But consider this. It's better than not playing a card on turn 1. So think of it as it's 1/5 in your favor. If you get to use it for helping you win, great. If you don't, it ends up over there. It was still a card you got to play on turn 1 that you didn't get to play otherwise. So take it or leave it. I think Martyr's going to see a lot more play now. That's actually really good. I think Titania is going to lose her job. So Titania doesn't get played a lot. But where it is played, I think they're going to have to turn Titania into a 1/6 to give. I mean, because it doesn't make sense to have a card that you can risk losing. You're better off having a card that you can only keep. Next card, please. Viper. They gave her a bump in power. She was a 2/3. She's a 3/4. Now you draw Red Hood and Viper on the same turn. Oh, the Hood. Sorry. What happened is people would play him on turn 1 and Viper on turn 2. A lot of people don't have 1 and 2 cost cards, very many in their deck. So oftentimes you have no way to stop Viper from doing what she does. You can't counter it. You can't put down Cosmo. You can't, block this happening. It's hard to block anyway. But like, say for example, you could play Polaris and move it somewhere else. I mean, you have a lot more options. Juggernaut, Polaris, ways to keep Viper from coming down on turn 3 and giving you the Hood. When she was a turn 2, a lot of the cards that could stop her weren't accessible yet. Now you got a lot of cards that can block her and keep the Hood on their side of the board. Now, granted, they're all playing Annihilus now. all the Viper decks are playing Annihilus now. But hey, that's one more card that they have to fiddle with. Next. Okay, so we got Ronan. They made Ronan a little better. I always thought Ronan was a little underpowered, and even they said here, we've been talking about for months giving him a little power, but we've been slow because they thought Loki was going to be a big deal. Loki is a big deal, and Loki's a pain in the rear. But Ronan the Accuser's now 5/5, so now he gets a little bit of a buff. He'll be more competitive with a lot of decks, I think. For one, he works great against Devil Dinosaur. I mean, actually, he's bigger and he could be better than Devil Dinosaur, right? So they play Devil Dinosaur, you play Ronan, you win because you're gonna have a 5/5. He's gonna have 5/3. Say thank you, sir. If you're not playing against Devil Dinosaur, then you got to play the cards that are going to buff them up. This will keep Black Widow in the conversation. I had a deck that used Darkhawk and and Ronin, and it worked pretty good. And now Ronin's even better. So maybe I may have to give that deck another look. All right, here's the one I keep referring back to, Maximus. Maximus, since almost the beginning of Silver Surfer, has been a staple in Silver Surfer decks. Then came the Gladiator. The Gladiator came in and started making people think, hey, I don't have to give them cards. In fact, I can potentially take one away from them. Maximus, everybody said, well, he's still a 3/7, and they have to play the card. So if I get it, I don't accidentally pull in a monster card, right? I don't pull in a 10, 12, 15, 20, whatever. There's no risk of that, which can happen with Gladiator. And even more so nowadays that Blob's around, and all those decks that are using Blob have a bunch of cards in them that are big, because this way Blob comes down and he's 1,000, whatever he is. I've seen him get up to 60 or 60 some, I think is about the most I've ever seen him get to. Minus, whatever duplicate, every power booster things that might come up in territories. But in general, he's pretty massive. Gladiator was a risk because, hey, do I play it? Because there's too many of these big cards out there. I'm going to pull one of those monsters in and they're just going to just be a monster card against me. People stuck with Maximus even though you were giving them cards. Which can weaken Blob too, because you're giving them cards, right? So it's not in the deck, and Blob, they may have all these big cards, but now they're all in their hands, making Blob a little less, On top of the fact that they have taken Maximus and made him worthless in a Silver Surfer deck. See, this they called a buff. We're delivering a buff to Maximus. That is a really good card. There's not very many 2-cost. Let's go look at 2-cost cards. And then we'll sort by power. Let's see the biggest 2-cost cards. Maximus is number 2 now. Only Ebony Maw is bigger of the 1s and 2s. Only Ebony Maw is bigger. And Ebony Maw restricts you, so you got to figure out a way to shut it down. A lot of people were playing Silk because it was a good 2/5, no real risk. Lizard was a 2/5 that you almost never see anymore. They really broke Lizard. I know this is totally off chart, but -4, it was just too risky. I think you don't see Lizard anymore because they totally broke him. When it was -3, it was people would deal with it, but you rarely see Lizard anymore. Because why? I mean, you have Silk. Doesn't lose any power. Yeah, she moves around wherever she lands. Here we go. Who knows? But ultimately, why play Lizard? There's no risk of losing Silk's power. So by they need to bring Lizard up to a 6, or heck, even a 7. Make the gamble of keeping him worth it. If you bring Lizard up to a 2/7 and say maybe he loses 5. He drops to a 2/2 if he gets filled up. But now there's a big guy with potential. He competes against Ebony Maw in that your opponent has to fill that spot to prevent you from having 7. But it's a playable card then. 6 maybe, but heck, you're just kind of back and forth between whether or not Maximus or Lizard. Which one do you want? Give them 2 cards. Don't give them 2 cards, but potentially you end up losing your power. So I don't know. But right now, as Lizard is, they've killed Lizard. Lizard's toast. With Silk and Maximus, there's no reason to play Lizard. Now they've made Gladiator even stronger. So he's still a 3 cost, but he's now a 3/8. 3/8 that's good. A 3/8 is awesome. I mean, I think that might be the strongest 3-cost card. Anybody bigger? Nope. Of all 1 through 3s, Gladiator is now officially the strongest card in all the 1 through 3s. Now, Daken can be just as strong if you're able to use your Muramasa, destroy your Muramasa. But beyond that, most guys aren't that great. I mean, if you do some math and some odd things, I mean, like Groot gets what, +2? 3/6. Not that big. Thor can be a 3/10. Potentially the biggest of the bunch. There's work. Not much work. You do have to get that card out of your deck somehow, but people find ways. You play Lady Thor and she pulls it in for you. So Thor is probably a bigger card, but less work. You don't have to worry about what it's doing, how hard it's going to be to get it into play. Punisher is the final update. They made him a 3/3, so now he's potentially a 3/7. It's not quite as strong as Gladiator, and a lot harder to accomplish because now you need your opponent to cooperate, so you got to play him at the right time. But he's potentially more playable. I used to play him. I think ultimately when it comes down to it, it's like, how hard is it going to be to take advantage of their power? Because when you're doing things like Silver Surfer, the goal is, maximize, get the most power down you can before Silver Surfer comes in and adds 2 more to everybody, right? So you want to say, okay, well, if this guy's going to be, potentially 7, and this guy's going to be potentially 8, and this guy's going to be potentially 10, a lot of potentialies don't always add up. So you need to make sure that you get those cards down, that the stuff comes up that you expect, and ultimately, you got to figure if you can optimize your deck enough to get those kind of plays. Honestly, I'd rather him be like a 3/1, so he could potentially reach 3/9, but I'd rather him go down to a 3/1 and get +2 for every card there. We'll have to see how these play out. I think they will affect some of my decks. I will make some changes, get some cards into play because of these changes. Will I try a whole new deck? Will I tweak current deck? I don't know. We will have to make that decision sometime in the future, but there you go. There's December 21st. Balance updates